Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Get Together with Selena Rezvani on negotiating a new normal. Depending on where we are in the world, we may now begin to consider a return to the office. Many things have changed over recent months, and many employers, employees are faced with some fundamental questions. What should the future of our workplace look like? Selena is the author of 2 books, Pushback and the Next Generation of Women Leaders. In both books, Selena wrote about advocating for yourself and for your needs at work. And that's what we're here to talk about. How are we going to negotiate our job needs and preferences going forward? So welcome, Selena, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Anna, so much for having me.
You're in Philadelphia. Are you working from home right now?
I am attempting to work from home with 2 new coworkers, my 7-year-old twins. So that is proving just like every other working parent out there right now.
I can confirm it's tough. How are you managing the challenges?
I think with a dose of humor, I think humor is really important to try to see the silver lining and the light side of things, and I think to lower your standards. For me, it's been lowering some of my standards around how productive I can be or how well and how much I can teach my children in person.
That's one of the things that we spoke about when you did our webinar with us, also being, gracious with yourself and being gracious with others who might be in the same situation. So I think that's still very much applicable advice as we talk about the future now as well. So Selena, you've written about negotiation skills, and often when we talk about negotiating in the workplace, we're talking about pay. But what questions might we need to negotiate now going forward?
That's a really good question. And I think one that a lot of people are feeling right now is hours or their schedule within their day, because for many people that's changed. You've probably seen the slogan going around that says, "We're in this together." And as much as I love the message of that slogan, I think there can be a kind of a dark side of pressure that can be applied to employees right now. And what I mean by that is, yes, we're in this together, but there can be a feeling like we need to all be in this to, save this business, or we need to all be in this together and be available no matter what, is required right now. And that's a lot of pressure on people. They have the old problems they were solving in their jobs before the crisis, and now they have new problems they're solving. So most people have more to do, not less. And if something's not working for you in your work format, in your day, it's a great time to negotiate, to get your time back. Maybe you're getting asked to attend 7:30 a.m. meetings or 5:30 p.m. meetings, and it doesn't work for you. This is a great time to negotiate for those hours. There's one more area I would love to share too, and this is very underused, and that is, the focus of your role. I notice during a time of change and turmoil, people like to go into their turtle shell. They kind of like to play it safe, and stay calm, not make a lot of noise, just focus on their work and do it. But the truth is, it's a wonderful time to negotiate when there's flux, when there's change, because things are not written in stone. Lots of things are up for discussion, up for revision. So if you want to change the focus of your role, or you want some more responsibility, this is actually a great time to ask, to negotiate.
Right. That is the definition of a crisis, isn't it? That it's a turning point, a time of change. So I think that's also a valuable, a silver lining maybe that we can focus on, that we do have more power to change things right now than maybe when things are as usual. We have also seen that some companies are generally more or less prepared to offer flexible working. And for the purposes of this conversation, of course, we're talking about jobs where flexible and remote working is a possibility. Why do you think there is this reluctance that is still very much present in some companies?
Yeah. I think it comes down to trust. I really do. I think it comes down to trust. And, when you don't trust employees, you tend to see that come out in remote work policies. Here's the thing, though. Trust is one of the top predictors of performance. So when you have high trust, it really pays in an organization. Here's what I would say to a company that's reluctant right now to offer flexibility. Lots of eyeballs are watching what you do right now and the ways you treat your employees and people in general. And I think lots of customers, lots of the public, lots of your employees are watching how you demonstrate care, basic care on a human being level. So I don't think you can overdo it in being human, checking with people, meeting people where they are. Listen, the other thing is, in the old days, people used to fear about remote work. They used to say, well, I can't communicate as well. I can't get my expectations across as clearly. I can't audit people's work as well. Today, we have 1,001 apps and collaboration tools and, project management, websites that we can go to and watch how work is getting done, who exactly is completing tasks, right? We have so many forms to do this. So I think we can't use that excuse that we lack the tools. We have the tools today to make this work.
We're proving it right now. I would love to just quickly go back to the point about trust. We're getting a lot of questions about trust at the moment. It seems to be one of the topics that's just crystallized out of this entire situation as being fundamental to feeling secure in your work. And it's a two-way street. So you as an employee need to trust your employer, and you as an employer need to be able to trust that your employees are doing the right thing. Do you have any advice on what we can do to support creating an environment of trust?
I think that's great. I think one piece of advice I give people is, if you're ever afraid, a message will be misunderstood, tell people the spirit in which you're saying it. And I think one thing people can do here is to tell them, this is how I'd like to manage you. I'd like to manage you in a hands-off way. I trust you, and I'm entrusting you with carrying out your day-to-day work. But tell people what you need. I would like an update from you once a week, telling me what you've accomplished or where you are with your projects. I think, telling people you trust them is a huge thing. And then once you've done that, you have to back it up with your actions. You have to back it up with your actions. And, I think trust is built in 1,000 little ways, where you don't jump in to micromanage, but you let that person figure it out, or you empower them to figure out the solution on their own. So I think, trust is something we build incrementally.
And speaking about flexibility, we were reading a study in the Harvard Business Review that said men and women alike want flexibility in their jobs. It's also another fundamental need. And yet there was a huge gap between those who said they need it and those who said they were also given that level of flexibility. We have seen in the past as well that flexible working arrangements were seen as something that maybe mothers needed, particularly. Now that everyone is working from home, everyone, do you think this is also changing the perception of flexible working?
I think it can. I think it's not a given, that it will, but I think it can. And that's wonderfully motivating and heartening. Sometimes I tell people the story a few years ago of this well-meaning law firm. They were losing women at the top of their organization. And so what did HR do? They came up with part-time partner tracks. Okay. And so, they offered them, people tested them out, and they surveyed people afterwards, and women said, we hate these. We hate these. Here's why. And what they said was, look, we're getting paid less. We're doing a lot of work, just as much work. But the worst part is, this is stigmatized. No men use this benefit. And that's the danger, right? That we fall into with certain benefits seen as, mommy benefits. This is a human benefit. And what excites me is there's a huge opportunity here if men stay in some of these remote work arrangements to level the playing field more, to really revolutionize, how flexibility is viewed. Because we all want better well-being. We all want better mental health. But I think it's been seen, to your excellent point, Anna, as kind of a woman's benefit in a lot of circles.
And that actually brings us really neatly onto another point. This is what we were talking about in our webinar, diversity and inclusion, that some jobs, by not being able to offer flexibility, might exclude certain people from being able to take those jobs because they have other commitments in their lives. Do you also think if we have a large-scale movement towards more flexible working or flexible working being normalized, it will also have benefits for diversity and inclusion in companies?
I think there are some possibilities there, but I don't think there's a guarantee of any kind that it's going to buy us more inclusion. And here's where I do see a possibility. And that is with technology, when you take something as basic as the meeting, the everyday meeting, right? We're better able to measure who talks when we do this remotely than, let's say, when we're sitting in a boardroom. We can use technology to our advantage, right? To see how many people spoke in that 10-person meeting and who dominated. And I think this is such an important everyday part of inclusion. We know from the research that we are smarter, we're more innovative, we make better decisions when we have inclusive, diverse teams, right? Because of that rub, that difference that the different team members bring to the table, we make better decisions. Well, that's great, but I think we need to use technology while we're on all of these calls and these video chats to actually see who is using the airtime and to take action around that, to say, hey, we want to hear from everybody today, and here's how we're going to get to each one of you.
And that goes back to your previous point on trust, that we don't just have to say it, we have to follow up with actions. We have to make sure that these ideas or these initiatives are actually carried out as well. And I think that's probably the tricky part. It's easy to have these good intentions, but actually following through might prove more of a challenge. Do you have any advice for companies who might need to see a real shift in their company culture?
Yeah, I think a really great one is a simple thing, which is creating norms, creating meeting norms, let's say, around that specific activity, just like many companies have norms around how teams come together, the tools they use, some of the processes they work through. Why not create a new set of norms for this new world we're living in, that is human, that gives people permission to be human? One example of this is having the kind of culture where if you have Zoom meetings, you can say to people, listen, if you need to get up and take a walk, or you need to go downstairs and make a sandwich, or you need to take care of a need, you can absolutely do that and get off video, and just stay on the audio call. Those little things meet people where they are.
And it's a very humane attitude to have, to treat your employees as individuals with needs that happen during what was always a working day. I would also, at this point, like to talk about the flip side. We know that when you're working at home, it can sometimes be really hard to distinguish between work and home. Do you also see a risk that having flexible working arrangements, if both parents, for example, are in this situation, this might create a disadvantage for one partner compared to the other?
I think I see many more of the positives in this remote work, especially, in relationships or in family units, right? I see many more positives to that flexible work. I do think for certain people, if you are very introverted or very quiet, I think this new world of remote work can be difficult. It can be difficult to be seen and heard in everyday meetings or projects, right? So I think those people have to work even a little bit harder, to follow up after the meeting with their report or the proposal they wrote, to kind of remind people, hey, I'm here, I'm doing things, I'm working, just because maybe they're not the most talkative in the group. But I think if you're somebody who's working from home and maybe your partner is too, or maybe they're not, if you need some parameters around that time and you're not getting it, ask for it. Ask for it. Maybe you say something like, I'm a big fan of when you have to enforce a boundary, trying to make a give in some way. If you're making an ask, how can you also make a give? So you might say something like, listen, I need to finish my workday each day at 5:30. But during the workday, I'm very happy to be very flexible on what it is I work on which projects I take on, or which teams I work with. Show people what you're willing to do, but it's okay to set and enforce, a very clear boundary.
Are we too reluctant in general to ask for what we need?
Yes. Absolutely. When I do workshops, Anna, it never ceases to amaze me when we're talking about negotiating benefits, pay, flexibility, whatever it is. Somebody will raise their hand and say, well, we can't negotiate in my industry, or at my company, we don't really do that. There is no latitude to do it. And when people say that, I'll say, okay, well, how many of you know about an exception to the rule? And everybody will raise their hand. So I think lesson number one is believe that things are negotiable. Believe that most things are negotiable. Don't tell yourself no before they tell you no. I think that's the first mindset shift. But the quick thing I would say is there was a survey done that shows people enjoy very high rates of success when they negotiate benefits. The score on one recent survey said 62% of people who asked for PTO, more PTO, received it. 75% of people who asked for a different schedule, a more flexible schedule, got it. That says something right there, which is odds are in your favor generally if you're asking for some of these things. So again, don't tell yourself no before they do. There are some ways that you can de-risk it for them. Maybe talk about how your competitors are offering a similar benefit, or if somebody in the next department next to you is enjoying that same benefit, let's say a certain kind of parental leave, you can say, hey, somebody over here is using the same benefit I'm asking for. There are little ways to position it as something the person is familiar with, something that's not a shocking change, from the norm. And that's what you want to do. You want to say, this is in line with our competitors. This is in line with other practices.
That's fantastic advice. When I would like to just a very brief personal anecdote, but after my daughter was born, I went back to the office a couple of weeks ahead of when I was actually meant to go back to talk to my boss, to just be like, hi, so I'm coming back soon. What's the situation with flexibility? I would like to reduce my working hours. And I have to say, I went into that conversation prepared to walk. If they said no, I was absolutely prepared to walk. And in the end, I did. But that's obviously not a situation for everyone. And it wouldn't have been a situation for me, given some other circumstances. But what can we do if our employer says no and we really do need that benefit?
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that story. And it takes a lot of nerve when you get that no to go back and act again. But my first piece of advice would be ask another time. ask another time. You know, there can actually be a benefit in being told no more than once, which is, you know, you can cite it. You can say, hey, I've gotten 3 no's on this request. I'd really appreciate you, you know, giving me the opportunity to test it, to try it out together. Right. And you're reminding somebody, you said no to this in the past. It can sometimes create an opening for them to say, okay, we can do it. You've worn me down. Little kids are very good at this with parents.
They're fantastic.
The other thing you can do is one of the things I like to, you know, advise people to do is frame it as a trial period. So instead of doing this, you know, for the rest of, you know, time, what if we did it for the next 3 months? Could we do a trial period and then revisit how the work is going after that 3 months? You know, sometimes that's one way you can de-risk it and get that yes the second time or the third time you ask.
Is that perhaps what we're seeing now, that this entire crisis situation is almost like a trial period for some companies to test out policies or practices that they weren't familiar with or weren't prepared to implement before?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to look at it, that I don't think anyone was expecting perfect when many organizations and employees were thrown into this situation. But we have a wonderful opportunity in this. We have a wonderful opportunity to see this as our beta, to see this as our trial test, and ask ourselves, okay, we adapted. How can we do better now? How can we be even more inclusive in this next phase? You know, even more creative, even better at engaging each other, you know, in courageous conversations.
And I would just love to leave it on with one final question on that topic. What would be your ideal scenario for the future? How would the workplace of the future look as a fair and inclusive and diverse place?
Well, I think remote work is here to stay. You know, I don't think this is a stop on a train. I think this is the new destination. And that excites me. It excites me to think of a future world and a future of work where you have less of a business mask on your face and then your you know, regular human self after work, but that you can blend those, that you can be more of who you really are, that there's a softer, more human side to the workplace. I think that's a wonderful vision we can preserve and maintain after this time. I think that you're seeing organizations in the future who are flatter, where it's okay for many people to contribute. It's not about hierarchy and who's the highest ranking in the meeting, that you're seeing, you know, broad engagement of all kinds of employees who are contributing in live meetings, over apps, conversationally, also more formally. You know, so I think we have a wonderful opportunity to use technology for good, but to make sure that we humans are still bearing some of the responsibility, that we're still, you know, steering the ship, even if we're using that technology.
I think that's a wonderful note to end the conversation on, and I think it's a really optimistic and motivating note as we look to the future as well. So thank you so much, Selena, for taking the time to talk to us about this. And as I mentioned, you did a webinar with us as well. Your books are in the getAbstract library, and I can really, really highly recommend everyone to take a look and have a read of the materials that we have there. So thank you again. And I hope it's not too stressful at home right now.
Thank you so much. This is such a joy to be here with you and getAbstract. I'm a huge fan, and I loved this conversation.
Thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone for watching. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.